Hello, hello. It is a active market here in Northern Colorado, so I'm sorry that I am running late today, but all good things, talking with some amazing people, moving to the area, moving out of the area as well. Some friends that are looking to move kind of down south to Erie and then some folks considering Northern Colorado. But we're going to jump into today's weekly live. Again, we come to you guys every Monday at noon. Today starts a little bit late, but talking to you guys about things that are happening in Fort Collins, city council meetings, things that you can do. And we've got some folks coming in to close this Wednesday, and we suggested, hey, like he thought, he's just going to come in solo, and he asked a couple of things to do, and I was like, dude, definitely go get a beer on Odell's patio. It looks like it's going to be a great week. And then the Horsetooth Falls, I would have to guess that it's starting to run a little bit. I saw Poudre starting to increase the water levels on the Poudre River are starting to increase. The Poudre Play Park looks like it's not just a trickle through anymore. And with all the moisture we've been getting, all the rain and things of that nature, I would have to imagine the Horsetooth Falls are running pretty good. So if you've hiked the falls this year, let me know how it looks. Everything should be really nice and green. But we've also been just getting nailed with, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and for being a high desert, our last 2 springs have been quite wet. And we need the moisture all the time. And a conversation that we've had, which is what city council has been discussing with, building of Halligan, and increasing its capacity, and the $100 million dam that they have to build. And it's just not that we don't have the water. We do. We have a ton of senior water rights in Fort Collins. It's just that we don't have the storage. And so building these reservoirs, Glade Reservoir, Chimney Hollow doesn't provide water to City of Fort Collins, but it's right outside Fort Collins, just to the west of Carter Lake, and Glade Reservoir, Halligan. These are all things that are important for our drought resistancy in Fort Collins. And speaking of which, Thornton owns some water rights, and they want to be building how many tens of miles of 70-mile pipeline project, and 85% of it's actually already complete or through the planning phase, but essentially taking water from North Fort Collins and taking it all the way down to Thornton. And they would pump 14,000 acre feet of water per year to Thornton's treatment plant. And water is just extremely important to the growth of these communities and how they're going to operate. And it's something that I know that the City of Fort Collins City Council is definitely addressing. We talked about yesterday, or last week, I think it was, impact fees, water fees. Initially, City Council brought in a third-party consultant, and they suggested that we should be selling water at the cost it would be for us to buy that same acre foot of water. And 1 acre foot provides water for 4 homes in Northern Colorado. And an acre foot currently, I think, is at $68,000. But they were recommending, this third-party consultant was recommending, hey, we need to pump that to $170,000. And the air that left the city council that last week, or a couple of weeks ago, was just, you could feel it. I mean, when they originally were provided this option, and which would then triple the cost of water to build a house. And obviously, a conversation that we've had here in Northern Colorado is, like, the cost to build a house is already expensive. And with these impact fees, admin fees, the holding costs, water, it's like all of these pressures, and they're just getting passed on to the end user. Here, I want to show this to you guys, because this is, I think, super interesting. Here we go. All right, present, share screen. Yeah. Okay. So here's where we're currently at, $68,200, and they were recommending $170,000 per acre foot. And city council kind of went back and said, no, we can't do this. We can't triple the cost of water for developers. And so they kind of came back with these 3 different methodologies and said you can do a market base with a 30% contingency and it's 20% factor. What we ultimately did was a cost-based, I believe it's going to be a cost-based with a 30% contingency and a 20% safety factor, equating to a $71,800 cost per acre foot. So still an increase of $3,000 or about 5%, just under 5%. But, it just kind of goes to show, how important, and sorry, my camera's been acting a little bit funky, but how important water is and how, places like Thornton and Greeley are going to fight for every ounce of water that they have. And they have, and water rights, I don't really get involved with it, but they are extremely strong property rights. And with the seniority and who has access to them and all of the rules that has to be played by, there's water courts. So way beyond my pay grade. I just know at high level and enough to kind of talk about it to just a little bit. But, with the growth of these areas in northern Colorado and Thornton and Greeley and Erie and all these, Johnstown, all these areas, people need the water to be able to build. And then also when they're building, they need schools, because obviously kids are moving into these areas. And that's been another hot topic in Fort Collins lately, is kind of this consolidation of schools in the Poudre School District. And there was a couple of different articles that came out this last week about kind of this kind of consolidation of sorts that are happening. There's listening sessions that are happening. And then on May 28th, the school board is going to bring their recommendations to the board, which would then be voted on June 11th. So in a month's time, we are going to know what their recommendations are. And per these articles, they are not going to delay these conversations and these topics. And one of the reasons, that's annoying that my video keeps going out. Sorry about that. One of the reasons that they're not going to delay is a conversation that I saw on Reddit, and it was, the conversation was, where should I send my kid? He's currently in Blevins. Should I send him to, I think the question was Lincoln or Lesher, but that kind of gets away from the point that I'm trying to make of Blevins was one of the schools on the west side of town that was suggested a couple different scenarios. There was scenario 1A, 1B, 2, and 3. And Blevins was recommended as a potential school to be either Polaris, move into Blevins, or shut down or reconfigured, or the scoop of the schools, the middle school students, to be kind of distributed evenly between Weber and Bolts and Lesher and Lincoln, all that kind of stuff. But Blevins was one of those schools that were discussed, and parents were already discussing like, hey, my kid's in 5th grade. He's going to be going to middle school next year. I don't want to have him get familiar with a school and then have to move schools the next year, because all these consolidations are not going to take place until, I believe it's the 25-26 year. But I'm pretty sure that's correct. But so these schools, it's kind of like a ticking time bomb, really, that the recommendations are going to take place this year, but these schools are going to be like kind of like a walking zombie, because they won't even exist the following year. So I can see the concern from parents of like, dude, my kid's going to go, he's a 5th grader. It's middle school is already a super tough time for kids. I don't want to, have them to go through a couple different, very difficult situations. So definitely something that everyone's talking about. We are going to find out more this month as far as these consolidations go. And it sounds like, hey, Poudre School District has kind of lagged behind the state as far as shutting down schools. One of the last schools that was shut down was Moore Elementary, which is now, I believe, home to Polaris, but If it's not, it was the last elementary school that was shut down. Beatty Elementary in the middle of town was considering being shut down, but there was a strong enough contingent that fought that. But basically, Poudre School District saying we are fighting a negative budget, and even with these consolidations, unless we went to the absolute extreme, which they're not going to do, which they told us and promised us they were not going to do, the plans that they're recommending are just going to save a significant portion, like millions of dollars, anywhere between like $1 to $2 million a year is going to be saved in their budget, which isn't going to cover the shortfall, but they're going to look for other grants and other programs. And but they can't delay any further. It's like rip the Band-Aid off and allow people to kind of move forward with their lives, knowing what's happening in Fort Collins. So that's definitely something that is on the topic. And I would say we talked about our kids are going to be going to Werner Elementary, and I've got clients that their kids, they're moving into Timnath, the Timnath area. And one of the suggestions is moving the high school to a middle school, but there was a resolution passed from citizens saying keep Timnath kids in Timnath. And so I think everyone's a little bit, on edge to see how does this impact me. But regardless, it's going to happen, and you're going to have to make considerations and determinations. But, it's easy for me to say that when Werner Elementary is kind of not necessarily a school that's been consistently recommended or in play. Not to say that it won't be, because it very well could be a school that's on the chopping block, and all of a sudden Werner becomes a daycare center, an early childhood center, and we've got to find another place to send our kiddo, which would be Bacon or Cruz, which I grew out. We currently and I guess that's a good kind of example is my son goes to school at preschool at Cruz, but my daughter goes to school at Werner. She's in kindergarten, and we make it work and are able to be flexible enough. And it's not really that bad of a drive to Cruz. Now, some of these parents that are maybe on like the very far northwest side, and if CLP gets closed and they've got to go even further, that's going to add some time. But for us, obviously, Werner's a middle of the neighborhood school. Don't even have to drive to it. Can ride your bike, not have to cross any busy streets. But Cruz, we do absolutely have to drive to. So we would then, I'm sure the bus routes would change and could accommodate that. But our daughter would be on the bus a little bit. Daughter and son would be on the bus a little bit longer, not too much, but a little bit longer. Or we're going to have to drive and make those trips, which City of Fort Collins City Council, with being 15-minute communities, is kind of like, hey, this is going to potentially add more vehicles, longer drive times, more carbon emissions, which we're going to talk about today when we talk about City Council and the building, what's it called? The building performance scoring systems, and how Fort Collins is going to plan to get to 80% reduced carbon emissions by 2030. And a big portion of that is going to be reducing carbon emissions from buildings, which make up about 2/3 of our carbon emissions. But anyways, moving on, we have also got conversations to talk about with Windsor, which is, Fort Collins, Northern Colorado. You are going to be spending time in Windsor, whether that be taking your kids to soccer or, enjoying different things like the Windsor Lake and the boardwalk there. Timnath, you're just going to be enjoying things all around Northern Colorado. So it's all this kind of like conglomerate of communities in and around Northern Colorado. So we can't ignore what's happening in Windsor. And one of the things that they are doing is they passed a resolution discouraging the conversion of commercial zone land to residential. And they had originally about 7,000 acres available for commercial land, which a big portion of that has been converted to residential. And we've always talked about how Windsor is kind of a bedroom community to Fort Collins, but has since grown into its own, small city. I think it's near 40,000 people now. And, but there's just not a ton of commercial. We go to Shoppy's Pizza. Pizza Vino is there. The Hearth, Chimney Park is a very, very high-end restaurant. There are restaurants there. There are things to do in Windsor, but not nearly in proportion to, I think, the amount of people that live there or options that are there. And clearly that is the case with Windsor Council basically saying we have to protect what remains of our last 3,000 acres that is developable to be commercial. We need the commercial zone, commercial buildings to come into Fort Collins. Let's see here. They're saying citizens of Windsor are saying that it needs to be more amenities and restaurants, but and as I've talked about in the past and in my real estate career, I always discuss how commercial follows residential rooftops. And I think Windsor has those residential rooftops at this point, and the city layout is pretty solid. You've got a lot of growth on the west side and east side of main, downtown Windsor. I mean, Rain Dance, Jacoby Farms, Green Spire, Prairie Song, tons of big developments in and around Windsor. And people want to be able to drive or ride their bike to go get food or restaurants or groceries. Not that Windsor is really able to do that necessarily, but at least more than what is there now, because there's just not enough. We've been going to soccer practice for the last 5 or 6 weeks, which we've only got to play one game out of 4 weekends because of rain. So that's been awesome, having to coach 3 days a week and not even getting to coach the games. But we've been going there for the last 6 weeks, 3 days or 3 nights a week. And, soccer gets done late at night. So we're like, let's just grab dinner. And we've been grabbing dinner, myself and my either daughter or son. And, I tend to find myself driving to Fort Collins for optionality. Because it's either like, all right, we can go to Quiznos. I don't do a ton of fast food. We go to Shoppies when the whole family comes to soccer practice on Wednesday or Thursday night. But, there's just not a lot of options. So I can definitely see where Windsor's wanting to be protective of what remains in their, remaining commercial developments. So, definitely wanting to keep the commercial developments going. I kind of want to jump in because I thought it was really interesting in regards. I don't think there's a lot more about what's happening. Like this week, we've got Art Week going on this week beginning May 3rd, and there's going to be an entire week until May 12th. Tons of different things going on with this week's Art Week. So we'll get to that here shortly. But I'm going to share my screen because there's this week council session. They had a Poudre Fire Authority kind of annual report. Oh, my back. An annual report. And it kind of talks about, it was the Poudre Fire Authority annual report, and both who they are, what they do, as well as what the intergovernmental agreement is, because they essentially provide services to all of these different areas, LaPorte, Bellevue, Horsetooth, Redstone Canyon, Timnath, Fort Collins. And a big portion of Larimer County's, I should say a decent portion of Larimer County's property taxes goes to pay for Poudre Fire Authority. And a quick background was there was what was called the Gallagher Amendment a few years back, I think 2019 or 2020. And it was perfect timing for Poudre Fire Authority to kind of put on a marketing campaign to try to get additional tax dollars, because what the Gallagher Amendment was, high level, it was a property tax cap that said commercial property taxes have to make up a certain percentage of our overall tax base. And the way that they do that is they readjust the assessment rate on an annual or every couple of years to make sure that those percentages remain balanced. And so our assessment rate used to be in the 20% teens, but each time with the growth of the residential population in Colorado versus the not necessarily growth, but versus the impact on commercial, residential went crazy. And so this huge property tax base the assessment rate had to keep on decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. And now it's all the way down to 7.15. And I think because of something that a temporary law ordinance that we passed last year, I think it's like 6.9. I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head, to help relieve some of the increased property tax that we were all receiving. But what happened is in 2019, 2020, we had some huge wildfires, and it was a discussion about how Poudre Fire Authority and other fire authorities are underfunded. And so we need to remove the Gallagher Amendment so that our property taxes can increase in line with our property value. So what that did was it froze at that time our assessment rate of 7.15% and allowed our property taxes to increase with home valuations and not get readjusted when that property tax assessment rate came into play. And so with property home values increasing dramatically in 2021 and 2022, well, our property taxes increased pretty dramatically. So Poudre Fire Authority has gotten these huge little bumps in pay. $50 million is their annual budget. But they serve a huge area and are vital to our community. But I thought what was super interesting is how many service calls they took in the last year. And, 17,000 being rescue and emergency calls, but only 287 fire calls. I think we should rename the Poudre Fire Authority to, First Responders Authority. I don't know. That's just me, because if we're only calling out to 287 fires, originally, sure, yes, fire is important, super important, get people safe and protected. But I will say, when my daughter she has an allergic reaction or an allergy to a nut. She ate that nut when she was very young, and it was, it was the craziest, most concerning thing as a parent I've ever been through. And I've got to show you this because it was, I was going through pictures the other night, which was kind of fun. But she went into the hospital, and when we called the emergency line, the Poudre Fire Authority showed up. It was within 2 minutes of our house, and it was amazing to see how quickly they got out there. But I want to show you guys this picture because it was just terrifying when it happened. But as few as fires as we have, they're still a very vital part to our first responders in northern Colorado. And here we go. You guys got to see this. Let's see. All right. That was my daughter when she ate a nut, and she was, I remember looking at her and I was like, Nola, are you okay? And she's a tough little girl, and she goes, yeah, I'm okay. And I was like, well, that's weird. And I was like, Nola, say you love me. She goes, I love you. And we had to hit her with the EpiPen, and it was terrifying. Called the emergency line. They were out there within, I think, 90 seconds, 2 minutes tops. Got her taken care of, and, just forever grateful for what they did. And, so first responders, emergency calls, medical calls, that is the big portion of the calls. So we should start a movement of moving the name from Poudre Fire Authority to First Responder Authority. But the Poudre Fire Authority, 229 full-time positions. A lot of, actually not as many volunteers as I thought, because when I had a few friends who volunteered for Poudre Fire Authority and with the goal of trying to become a full-time firefighter. And, but it just, it felt like, it was difficult for them to get on. And now I see why. There's only 35 volunteer positions. But here's kind of the area that they serve, 230 square miles. And as you saw, there was, 14 fire stations. Fire station number 7 is getting rebuilt, there's going to be a new fire station number 7 coming. And they just put into place 2 new red fire trucks. And they're also getting a new headquarters in Old Town. Their headquarters is pretty dinky. It's fine. It's in a parking garage, but they're going to get a new headquarters in Old Town. And and they did attest to saying, hey, we have received a lot of additional revenue because of the property taxes. But serving 230 square miles, here's all their fire stations. And one thing that's interesting is their district calls versus their in-city calls, and the intergovernmental agreement that they have with the city of Fort Collins, because as we annex parts into Fort Collins, how does the revenue split come into play? Property taxes get impacted. The kind of math behind that is beyond my understanding, so I'm not going to jump into it. But I've had a lot of friends who are in the PFA, but definitely grateful to have Poudre Fire Authority. They're a great organization, and to Fort Collins, Northern Colorado, and grateful for them. So, and thank you for saving my daughter's life a couple of years back. The next thing that they talked about at City Council was this building performance standard. So 2/3 of our community carbon emissions come from local businesses. And we have a goal of 80% reduction in greenhouse emissions by 2030. And we are not on track to accomplish this goal. And but one of the things that could happen is that they said commercial buildings of greater than 5,000 square feet are accounting for 40% of electricity use that for all buildings, including residential, industrial, and commercial. So if we can put these building performance standards on, which are going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for these companies, and there's financing and things of that nature behind them. But I passed the buck. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be real. I managed Old Town Square for nearly a decade. And when I was leaving in the early 2020s, 2021, end of 2021, early 2022, when I was leaving there officially, they were putting in these building performance standards and benchmarking. They were calling it benchmarking at that time, because all they wanted to see, not all, we knew that there was some back end reasons why they wanted the information that they wanted, but essentially they wanted to tie into and look at our utility use, both gas and electric. I think water too, gas, electric, and water for our commercial buildings in Old Town, and any building over, I think it was, 5,000 square feet, but they kind of had a waterfall effect. For the first year, anything over 10,000, second year was like over 7,500, and third year over 5,000, that we had to provide utility information to the city so that they could see where our utility use was. And then they're going to now implement regulatory standards onto these buildings that are greater than 5,000 square feet. That is absolutely going to cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars to these buildings. And the hope is that we can reduce our, electrical use, our carbon emissions, and get closer to our goal of 80% reduction by 2030. But it's a long way to go. And this building performance standards, they're looking as a target date to begin implementation by 2027, with a deadline by 2030, meaning these companies are going to have to begin placing significant investment in their commercial buildings beginning in 2027, but with a deadline of 2030. And I'm sure there's going to be financing available, and there will be some increased, efficiencies of these buildings, and it's probably a great thing long term. But I'm an investor in real estate, and I almost bought a building in Old Town this last year, and I would have been a minority partner, so by no means would have been hugely financially burdensome for me. But I can tell you that the individual who did buy the building is a private owner, and all of a sudden he's going to be strapped with $100,000 to $300,000 bill to retrofit the building for maybe new furnaces, AC, windows, whatever these retrofits are going to be to push their building to perform for these standards. Now, I will say City of Fort Collins is allowing for some waivers for older buildings and some kind of pushback, and they're not an iron fist saying, if your building's over 5,000 square feet, you have to do this, this, and this. If it's too burdensome, or if there's, things that just can't be retrofitted, then they are going to look at that. What was interesting is they said that 32% of the 1,400 buildings that fall within this 5,000 square foot commercial building or bigger are already in compliance with these building performance standards. But that does mean that 68% are not. And, talk about a great economic boon for the tradespeople in the city of Fort Collins, because all of a sudden they might have to be putting in new windows, new roofs, new air pumps, ACs, furnaces, filter system, ducting, insulation, foam insulation, all this kind of different things. They're going to be inundated with business. So if you're looking for a business opportunity, get involved with that. I mean, shoot, you got 3 years before they start implementing these rule changes for you to start a business and get rocking and rolling on it. And you're going to have built-in clients in Fort Collins and Northern Colorado because of the rules and regulations that they are going to have to abide by. And, but shoot, it's our ultimate goal is to be carbon neutral by 2050. And it's obviously a team effort. I can tell you from an investor in real estate person myself, a smaller investor, I'm not a huge fan of these types of forced changes. It's probably good long term. I think we're not giving technology maybe enough of a runway or a chance to catch up. Like solar. Solar is a great example where it used to be completely financially, it didn't make any sense financially to do solar on your roof. Like the payback period was like 15 or 20 years. And with the average time living in a house, like you're not going to get paid back. So it was just so much of an intentional thing. People wanted to buy solar and put solar on their roof because that was kind of like who they wanted to be, like kind of like their goal as an individual was to, help the environment. But now you could put solar on your roof for a fraction of what that used to be, and your payback period is much better. And the battery storage capacity is coming online that, will make it better for you to be able to store the power and use it on the dark, calm nights. Dark, calm, no wind, that means no energy being produced. So you're having to use the grid. And so I feel like, maybe between now and 2027, technology increases to where some of these, HVAC systems don't cost as much, or mini splits or air pumps or, solar or windows, 3D printing. But, I would say it would be very frustrating as a building owner and I would say this, I had a building in Old Town that was going to go through a major renovation, and had I not pushed back on the city asked more, they were wanting me to raise my building up 3 feet because it was in a flood zone. And because the amount of renovation that I was going to be doing to this, I had to then raise my building standards. Like I was no longer grandfathered in. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I said that, and I kind of drew back my renovation budget to not get into this, losing my grandfather. And the next year, they adjusted the floodplain to move my house out of it. And so I would have spent, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to raise my house 3 feet for the following year to come out of a flood zone. And I can only imagine how devastated, annoyed, mad, upset, angry, all of those emotions and more I would have been had that happened. And I don't think we should be waiting around for technology to catch up, or just, the world to fall apart, climate crisis, all that kind of stuff. But I would say that technology is happening. E-bikes are, something that we see on the roads so much more than we did even a year ago, 2 years ago. And those people are taking their cars off the street and riding bikes. I do think there needs to be some rules behind e-bikes, FYI, but that's a technology that's brand new, and not brand new, but newly implemented and being used in the vehicles and cars. And, what if we could 3D print a window or something along those lines that the cost of material is decreases dramatically to where it can perfectly fit that window. And all you have to do is get a piece of glass or 2 pieces of glass, and all the technology that's way beyond me. But I do think we need to push as a community towards a goal. But I also think, as far as an investor and a building owner, putting some of these cost burdens on are going to either A, dramatically increase rents, B, produce sales or vacancies, or buildings that just don't make sense to operate anymore, because, hey, I'm going to have to drop $500,000 on this building. But maybe if we can figure out, between technology, some ordinances and regulations and all that kind of stuff, and financial help and leeway, we can all come to the table and make this work. But I'm not saying that I have the right solution. I'm just saying I know that this would be very frustrating and insanely burdensome financially for some of these building owners. But that is happening. It's going on, and we will be seeing that kind of come through, and I believe being taken place in 2027 as far as a target date, with a 2030 deadline. Sorry. And finally, the Community Capital Improvement Program, CCIP, is a 1/4-cent sales tax that goes directly to helping our streets, and then also building and producing new amenities. It is basically up for renewal, and they're going to be putting it on the 2025 ballot. Our city sales tax, just had a 1/2 cent bump, beginning January 2021, between basically they call it the 2050 1/2 cent sales tax. But this one's coming up for renewal, and Fort Collins is sales tax is 8.05%, of which 4.35% of that comes from the city of Fort Collins. And that's broken down quite a bit. But the Community Capital Improvement Program is really doing some pretty phenomenal things, helping build underpasses, overpasses, Southeast Community Center. It's helping fund, better roadways. And so it sounds like that tax is probably going to be renewed and pretty heavily supported. It's passed 2 different times with over an 80% approval on the last 2 measures. So they're trying to agree to put this on the ballot again in 2025, but this time have a 20-year time horizon for it. And I'll be voting yes on that. But we did have some interesting kind of dialogue between city council members. And with that being said, we had somebody saying we're just hoping that our street maintenance programs actually go down because of the cars that get taken off the road. So I don't think I don't know if that's going to happen, but maybe e-bikes, public transportation, all that kind of stuff. But it's definitely something that is good for Fort Collins, the amenities, the spreading out of these amenities in Fort Collins and streets programs. So that is all I've got. Again, what's happening this week? An art walk. So if you're interested in art, it's going to go from May 3rd to May 12th. A lot of that's going to be downtown. That is about it. And that's all I've got. I don't have any questions in the comment section, but feel free to reach out. That is a long episode, 38 minutes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, got a lot out of it. And if you guys ever have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out. Thanks for watching. Bye.